On Sunday, June 1st, 1952, the most violent riot in the modern history of Botswana took place in the village of Serowe. The Serowe riot, which broke out at the traditional court known as a Khotla, was the culmination of a whole year of tension and unrest in the Bamangwato Reserve. 3 policemen were killed in the riot, and this outbreak of violence came as a surprise not only to the British colonizers, but to the Bangwato people themselves and the rest of Botswana, known at the time as the Bechuanaland Protectorate. The Serowe riot was in large part a reaction to the British government's decision to exile from Bechuanaland a prominent young man for his interracial marriage with a white woman. This is a story about Botswana's founding president, Seretse Khama, and how his marriage to English woman Ruth Williams posed a serious threat to the British Commonwealth and especially to the white minority regimes of South Africa and Southern Rhodesia. But to understand why this interracial marriage was such a problem, we first need to understand who Seretse Khama was, as well as the racial and political atmosphere in the region at that time. Seretse Khuitsibeng Mapiri Khama was born on the 1st of July 1921 in Serowe, which was the capital of the Bamangwato Reserve in the then Bechuanaland Protectorate. His grandfather was Khama III, who was the paramount chief or Kgosi of the Bangwato ethnic group. Having declared the Protectorate of Bechuanaland in 1885, the British government began to consider handing over the administration of the territory to Cecil John Rhodes' British South Africa Company. To avoid this, Seretse's grandfather, Khama III, alongside Kgosi Sebele I of the Bakwena and Kgosi Batueng I of the Bangwaketsi, traveled to Britain to mount pressure on Queen Victoria and protest against the transfer of their territories to the British South Africa Company. The 3 chiefs would succeed in this mission, keeping their territories under the protection and administration of the British government as opposed to the Charter Company. Seretse Khama's grandfather died in 1923 and was succeeded by his son Sekgoma II as the Kgosi of the Bangwato people. Unfortunately, Sekgoma II would only rule for 2 years, succumbing to a short illness and dying in 1925, leaving the 4-year-old Seretse as the heir apparent. Seretse's paternal uncle, Tsekedi Khama, was made regent and reigned on behalf of the young boy. But when Seretse's mother died 5 years later, Tsekedi Khama became not only regent, but Seretse's legal guardian too. Through his uncle's efforts, Seretse Khama was later enrolled at the Lovedale School in South Africa for Standard 1, even though the colonial administration had wished for him to be sent to Southern Rhodesia out of fear that Lovedale was home to some radical elements. After being diagnosed with tuberculosis and going back home for a year, Seretse then returned to South Africa, this time at Adams College in Natal, and was later moved to Tiger Kloof just south of Riebeek in the Cape Colony. Throughout his years in South Africa, Seretse often had to be sent back home to Serowe because he was a very sickly child. In 1940, at the age of 19, Seretse returned to Lovedale for a 2-year matriculation course that would enable him to get into university. In this book by historians Neil Parsons, Thomas Clough, and Henderson, it is said that Seretse had a strong dislike for Xhosa royal kids at Lovedale because they insisted on being addressed as chiefs. While he was in essence a chief himself, Seretse did not want to be referred to as such, and he was even reported to have slapped other kids for calling him chief while at school. In 1942, he was admitted to Fort Hare for a General Bachelor of Arts with a focus on law and administration. Then, in 1944, he went to Witwatersrand University for a degree in law, where he became good friends with Joshua Nkomo and became frequents at the Blue Lagoon restaurant, where they mingled with ANC youth such as Oliver Tambo and Nelson Mandela. Seretse did not even finish the year at Wits University because, when the Second World War ended, he was now able to go study in England, which had been his uncle's desire. It was while studying law in London that Seretse would meet Ruth Williams, an encounter that would later send their names echoing across the British Empire and the world at large. In 1947, Seretse was introduced to Ruth Williams by her older sister at one of the events that the London Missionary Society often organized for African students. At the time, Seretse was a law student, while Ruth was a clerk at an insurance company at Lloyd's of London. During the Second World War, Ruth had also served in the Women's Auxiliary Air Force as an ambulance driver. Seretse dated Ruth for a while, and in 1948, he asked her to marry him, a proposal which she happily accepted. Excited about this, Seretse then wrote a letter to his uncle and regent, Tsekedi Kgama, informing him of his engagement to Ruth. But this did not go well with the traditionalist uncle, and he tried to dissuade Seretse from going on with the marriage because he felt that it would be disastrous not only for Seretse, but for the Bangatu people at large to have a white queen. The couple had intended on getting married at the Anglican Church, but Tsekedi, having good relations with the British government and the London Missionary Society, managed to convince the Bishop of London and the Vicar of the church not to marry them. But undeterred in their resolution, the couple went on to get married at a registry office in Kensington. Just like Tsekedi, the vast majority of the Bangatu people back in Bechuanaland were against Seretse's marriage, and they began to question his eventual ascension and installation to the throne for as long as he was married to Ruth. Between November and December 1948, two Khotla meetings, which were basically traditional assemblies, were held in Serowe to publicly discuss Seretse's marriage. At both meetings, Seretse was told to choose between his wife and the Bamangatu chieftaincy, and each time he refused to choose, insisting instead that the Bangatu people should accept his wife if they wanted him to ever be their chief. Then, at the third Khotla meeting, which was held in June 1949, after a moving speech by Seretse, the Bangatu people had a change of heart and they accepted him as their rightful chief, together with his English wife. Tsekedi Kgama, having lost the confidence of the people, announced his intentions to step down as regent. Together with some of his followers, he moved to the village of Rametsana, where he vowed to continue fighting against Seretse's marriage. There was also a belief among the Bangatu people that Tsekedi wanted to assume the chieftaincy for himself. Historian Neil Parsons has argued that Tsekedi resigned from the regency and exiled himself in Rametsana to wait for the colonial government to officially install him as a full chief to replace Seretse. Okay, so we understand why Seretse's marriage to Ruth was initially rejected by the Bangatu people. But they ultimately came around and they accepted Ruth as their future queen. If that's the case, then why was Seretse exiled from Bechuanaland, ultimately leading to the violent riot of 1952 which I mentioned earlier? Well, it's because this interracial marriage had implications on the political atmosphere of the time, and especially in Southern Africa. You see, the settler minority governments of Southern Rhodesia and South Africa, which had for a long time hoped to incorporate Bechuanaland, protested this marriage. The administration of Bechuanaland was highly dependent on the two settler colonies, and after World War II, Britain really couldn't risk upsetting relations with the South Africans. To Southern Rhodesia and South Africa, an interracial marriage of a chief just outside of their borders was a subversion of the notions of racial, social, and political segregation which they held strongly. To make things worse, the acceptance of Seretse as chief by the Bangatu people happened just a year after the National Party came into power in South Africa, which marked the official entrenchment of apartheid in that country. The National Party also wanted to distance South Africa from Britain, so the British government felt that an official recognition of Seretse as chief would represent a threat to the relationship of South Africa with the Commonwealth. As a result, Seretse was invited back to Britain in 1950, and after being asked to renounce his chieftaincy for some money, a request he declined by the way, he was subsequently banned from returning to the Bechuanaland Protectorate, effectively forcing him into exile. The forced exile of Seretse Kgama angered the Bangatu people, and this led to a series of disturbances across the Bamangatu Reserve in Bechuanaland. The biggest of these happened on the 1st of June 1952. Just 10 days prior, a delegation of 6 Bangatu men had returned from a futile trip to London where they had failed to convince the British government to bring back their rightful chief. Furthermore, the British government initiated an order in council by which it would install Rasebola Khamani as the interim chief of the Bangatu. This led to a series of protest meetings in the smaller Khotlas where the pro-Seretse people voiced their fears that the British government was trying to reimpose the rule of Tsekedi through Rasebolayi. From the 21st to the 31st of May 1952, a series of defiant actions towards the district commissioner had led to the ban of all Khotla meetings, a ban on hunting permits and ammunition, as well as a prohibition on the sale of beer. Things were really getting tense in Seruwe and the rest of the Bamangwato Reserve. By this time, the colonial administration had recognized that the Bechuanaland police alone would not be able to cope with the incipient troubles. Police reinforcements were then brought in from the then Basutoland and Swaziland, arriving in Seruwe at 4 a.m. on the 1st of June 1952. Later that afternoon, there were major confrontations at the Seruwe Khotla between demonstrators and police. The district commissioner, standing behind lines of policemen in riot gear, tried to caution the protesters with a megaphone. But the crowd, with women at the forefront, advanced towards the lines of police with sticks and stones, intending to attack the district commissioner. Tear gas was fired into the angry crowd and violence broke out in the Khotla. As the police trucks attempted to drive away from the Khotla with the district commissioner, one African policeman was dragged out of the vehicle and killed by the angry protesters. 2 African members of the Basutoland Mounted Police were also chased and subsequently beaten to death. This outburst of violence in a territory understood by the British to be tranquil was a surprise for the Bangwato people and the British alike. On the next day, reinforcements from the British South Africa Police arrived from Bulawayo in southern Rhodesia to try and help contain the situation in the Bamangwato Reserve. The heavy police presence and the fact that what had happened was very uncharacteristic deterred any further incidents. In the following week, there were a series of arrests and charges were laid, ranging from rioting, incitement, as well as murder. Back in Britain, the Seruwe riot was discussed in both the House of Commons and the House of Lords. The government tried to spin the whole thing and claimed that drunken men and women had gotten extremely excited and went too far. But the ultimate cause of the Seruwe riot was the forced exile of Seretse Khama and how he was barred from his rightful succession to the Bamangwato throne because of his marriage to a white woman. The British government was just unwilling to admit this fact, especially considering that all this was done in an attempt to appease the South Africans and Southern Rhodesians. After 6 years in forced exile, Seretse renounced his birthright to the Bamangwato chieftaincy and his ban from Bechuanaland was finally lifted in 1956. Returning to Bechuanaland as a common man, it soon became apparent that Seretse was more interested in national matters as opposed to ethnic or tribal matters. Within the context of growing African nationalism and decolonization in the 50s and 60s, Seretse showed great national vision as a member of both the Joint Advisory Council and the Legislative Council of Bechuanaland. In 1962, Seretse formed the Bechuanaland Democratic Party, later renamed the Botswana Democratic Party, mainly as a rival to the Bechuanaland or Botswana People's Party, which was formed in 1960. And so, in the first ever elections held in 1965, Seretse's Democratic Party unsurprisingly won over 80% of the vote, scooping 28 of the 31 parliamentary seats. Seretse Khama became Prime Minister, and later, after Botswana's independence in September 1966, he became President. Now, Seretse Khama's work and legacy as the first President of Botswana is well known. At independence in 1966, Botswana was the second poorest country in the world. But today, Botswana is one of the world's greatest success stories, owing largely to Seretse Khama's visionary leadership in the country's formative years and of course, the efforts of his successors over the last few decades. What this story was about, however, is the bravery of Seretse Khama and Ruth Williams in the face of adversity. It's an inspiring story about how they defied racial notions and rules when it was not even fashionable to do so. But more importantly, it's a story about a man giving up his tribal or ethnic leadership for love, and then 9 years later, taking up the leadership of a country as Prime Minister and then President. Don't forget to like and share this video if you've enjoyed it. And if you haven't done so already, consider subscribing to this channel. I'm Simon Bayani, and this is Africa in Retrospect. Cheers for now.